So in this video, I want to talk about the topic of how Ainz is a self-insert for the writer. So of course I'm not talking about us as the readers, but as the writer, Ainz I've always seen as a self-insert for the writer himself. And so this is a bit of a hot take. I know some people that do not believe this, but I'm going to get into the reasons why, and of course I won't be talking about any spoilers, just personal opinions and some observations from the early volumes of how the writer has kind of, I felt, created a story that is very much built around his feelings about his life and where he was at mentally. So the first part to talk about is the work culture. So in the first volume, the anime doesn't completely capture this, which of course is never going to be a one-to-one, but in the light novel it really talks about the work culture that the main character for Overlord is in, which is basically this sort of cogwheel thing, and I do believe that's how he words it in the light novel. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but basically, paraphrasing, he speaks as if he is a part of a cogwheel just in a very large system, and he kind of just feels like he's just been grounded down, and it just feels like meaningless, constant work culture, like to the grind kind of mindset. And that's something that a lot of people talk about online, is that grind mindset, and some people love it, some people don't. But I do think it is a mindset that I think some writers do talk about in their light novels, and especially isekais, where you get that self-insert protagonist kind of style, where it's like a 30 to 40 year old office worker, sometimes younger, sometimes older, and they basically just either fall asleep and never wake up in their work, or they somehow get hit by a truck car while going to work, or something like that. There's many different variations of how being transported or reincarnated in a alternative world happens. Of course, this isn't the only thing that happens. There are many other variations, like young teenagers in school and all that, but one of the common ones that I see for isekais is that office worker basically being reincarnated in an alternative world. And it definitely just feels like that the reason why these isekais are so popular is because it is a way for a lot of people in that grind culture in Japan to escape from that. And of course I've seen videos on YouTube trying to say that Japan's work culture is perfectly fine, but just reading these authors and how they describe that work culture, it clearly shows that there's a little bit more to it. And I feel like some people kind of glorify the grind culture, which if you're into the grind culture and you want to work because that's what you enjoy, that's more power to you. But when I read Overlord, I very much get that vibe that the author is really poking at that work culture and saying in a roundabout way, paraphrasing again, that it just feels like they feel like a part of a cogwheel. They just feel like a number on a spreadsheet kind of system. And so that, I think, is kind of a callback, at least to some of his life, because he does work in an office. I believe he still does to this day. It might have changed, but when a couple of years ago, I do believe that he was very much working in an office, because one of the characters in Overlord in the later volumes, a certain individual, is actually based on a colleague that he worked with that he really did not like. And trust me, when you read that character, it's in the Holy Kingdom arc, she is not pleasant. She is extremely difficult, very much one of those, as people would like to say, a Karen type character. And yeah, so you can tell that the author is not scared of putting characters into the story that are representative of his real life situations. Then you've also got to look at the whole situation of the Supreme Beings. The way I see the Supreme Beings is him losing his friends, because this is something that some light novel or anime fans don't know, is that the author, of course, did have some D&D buddies that ended up moving on, doing their own things, and so he didn't really have those D&D buddies that he used to have. And so I feel like the author felt lonely. He was trying to make new friends, which he ended up making, and I'll get into that soon, but he basically felt like his friends moved on or kind of abandoned him. And that's why I do feel like with Ainz in the story, you kind of get that abandonment feeling, and that's where Albedo kind of represents that more harsher part of where she's like, oh, they left us kind of attitude. She doesn't have much loyalty to the Supreme Beings like some of the other NPCs do. She very much is not the biggest fan of them. And for those that are saying I'm wrong, she made a hit squad to kill them. And that is in the anime and in the light novel. So if you've missed that subtle reference, yeah, she's not the biggest fan of the Supreme Beings. So I do feel like that is another callback to the writer, and kind of showing that he felt like his friends just faded away, and so he kind of felt lost while looking for new friends. And as time went on, of course, he ended up making new friends, and some of those are the light novel author for Log Horizon and the light novel author for Tanya the Evil. And so he's got new D&D buddies, gaming buddies to play with, and so you kind of see that mindset change as new volumes come out. And I feel like as that's happened, his interest in wanting to continue to write the light novels has diminished as he has moved on as an individual. And I do feel like volume, I believe 14 is the volume where it's basically that mindset of, I'm done, let's move on kind of attitude, where he basically, and of course this is the latest season of the anime, so if you haven't, well, what do you do? And watch the latest season, where he basically wipes out an entire kingdom. And that to me is the mindset of Ainz, or the writer, basically saying, I'm done, let's move on kind of attitude. I know some people don't agree with that, because Ainz has always had that mindset of that he doesn't want to rule over a kingdom of just nothing, like just kill everyone and then there's no one left. He always wanted to rule over others, at least people there. But in that volume, he just basically just threw his hands up and went, nah, I'm done. And yes, there is justifiable reasons in that volume why he got fed up, but I do feel like the author put that in there to justify his overall feelings of that. Now, I'm not saying that's a bad thing, because I feel like some people use that as like, oh, so you're saying it's a bad thing, but it does show that the author kind of had moved on and wanted to conclude the story. Now, of course, there are other things that have agitated him about the story and him wanting to rush it. He's been back and forwards. He's so-called claimed, and again, take this with a grain of salt, because anime fans have a tendency to either over-exaggerate or under-exaggerate, but he's claimed that he's had ideas for 50 volumes and then it's gone down to 30 to 25 to 24 to 20, and now we're down to what we're getting is a volume, I'm having a mental blank, around volume 18. I'm having a mental blank, but there should be 2 more volumes coming out. There are 2 currently out in Japan that the West don't have, and there are 2 more coming out, and then that's the end of the story. So it's clear that the author has moved on, and as much as that is sad, it is just an inevitable process where authors do, 1, get burnout, 2, just lose focus and interest. But I also think because the story was so big in scope, and it's a video that I've made before called Scope Creep, about how the author made the world too big and too vast and had too many moving cogwheels in the story, basically the NPCs, I think there were just too many NPCs in the story that he had to kind of keep track of, with the floor guardians, the maids themselves. Like, there are a lot of things that the author had to kind of keep track of, and I think as you build on that, it becomes harder and harder and harder for an author to make all that stuff feel relevant. And I believe that no matter how good of a writer you are, because the Overlord author is a brilliant author, very good, amazing, but it becomes increasingly difficult and practically impossible to maintain all these characters without some feeling abandoned and kind of feel forgotten, and major story points just kind of ending weirdly and abruptly. And that is something that I have noticed in the light novels is basically happening, where certain plot points are either ending very quickly and kind of feeling unpolished and unfinished, or they're just completely left open-ended. And yes, the author has said that there's going to be sort of story strings that are just kind of left open for the fans to either make up their own head canon or create their own fan. But I also think that is just a way for the author to basically say, you know what, I'm not going to bother touching these, it's too much work, let the fans decide on how they want to end it. Whether you want to say that's an excuse or not, that's up to you individually. I personally think it's a bit of an excuse, but anytime I say that, I get instantly pitchforked by really diehard Overlord fans. And again, I'm a big diehard Overlord fan. I love Overlord. I've made so many videos, I've lost count, and they're in the hundreds, probably close to 1,000 plus. That's between my main channel and my second channel. I love Overlord. I think it's a really great story. So much fun complexity to it. The author's phenomenal, but you can definitely see, at least in my opinion and many people that I've spoken to, that the story felt like the author just gave up. And especially in the 2 new volumes that are in Japan, that's very much of a thing. And I think that's the thing. It is a self-insert. As the story progressed, as the author moved on and made new friends, he lost interest and focus on the story, and it became increasingly harder for him to maintain all these story points because he just kind of moved on. One major story point he mentioned that he wanted to continue way before was about the Dwarven Kingdom. There's a particular piece of ore that was stolen from one of the dwarves, and that was meant to be another story point that comes up later. That's a story string that's completely abandoned. Now, of course, you could make your own fan fiction on that, and I really do look forward to many fans that are going to be making fanfics. There are some already out there. I've considered reading them and talking about them. Not sure if that's something that people want on this channel or not, because it's not canon, but it is still really good story stuff. There's one about Shao-Tier and like a special squadron for the Valkyries. I think it's Valkyries, and that would be really cool to talk about and read. But again, it just depends on if people want that non-canon fan story to be something to talk about, part of Overlord. It at least gives us something to kind of keep the story going. So I'd love to know your thoughts in the comment section down below. Overlord is something that's very close to heart, but it is also, it makes it harder to also sit there and be like, yeah, it's clear that the author has just given up. So again, love to know your thoughts. If you like this video, hit the like, subscribe, and I'll see you beautiful nerds in the next video.